Indulging in chips, Twinkies, and a greasy cheeseburger from the drive-thru feels like a modern staple. However, humanity's love for junk food dates back much further. The origins of what would become the fast food industry can be traced back to medieval Europe, where people satisfied their cravings with some rather unusual fare. Of course, knights weren't exactly galloping through a drive-thru or snacking on candy bars on their way to the castle. Instead, medieval fast food catered to travelers and the poor, and it wasn't always appetizing. In today's episode of Weird History, we're exploring what junk food was like in the Middle Ages. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the Weird History channel. And while you're at it, drop a comment to let us know what other historical food topics you'd like us to explore next. Alright, let's dive into the medieval era with those cool ranch Doritos. London is famous for its iconic landmarks and rich British culture, not to mention being the place where Harry Potter was hatched in Big Ben by owls. But during the Middle Ages, London was a bustling center of trade and commerce, although poverty was widespread across Europe. For many Londoners, cooking at home wasn't always feasible or even possible. Cooking equipment and fuel were costly, and many of the poor lived in cramped tenement housing that often lacked basic furnishings, let alone a hearth. Without a hearth, cooking was a daunting challenge, unless you wanted to fill your home with smoke and risk burning down your already meager dwelling. Instead, people turned to cook shops, the medieval equivalent of grabbing some takeout. These cook shops sprang up along the Thames, catering to the community's fast food needs. Open 24 hours a day, these cook shops offered hot meals to both tourists and locals, with menus that changed with the seasons. But instead of driving through in a chariot or on horseback, customers would simply stroll up to the shops to purchase their favorite hot meal. Some would take their food home to eat later, avoiding the need to eat in public. Cook shops weren't just a London phenomenon. In Bristol, one street became known as Cook's Row, where the variety expanded to include poultry, fish, and more. These shops may have been among the first to embrace the motto, "It's the smell that sells." They'd place their hearths outside the shop and strategically cook food to lure in customers with the enticing aromas. Some shops specialized in sweets, while others were known for their pancakes and bread. But perhaps the most popular of all were the shops that sold meat pies. These savory, meat-filled delights were a hit, much like a medieval version of the hamburger, minus the fries and Coke. Speaking of burgers, who doesn't love a Big Mac? There's just something satisfying about holding most of the basic food groups in your hand and devouring them like a snake sneaking dinner past airport security. So it's no surprise that meat pies, the Dark Ages equivalent of a drive-in burger, were so popular. These tasty little parcels were both filling and portable, the hallmarks of a fast food sensation. However, Mrs. Lovett's famous meat pies had a dark side: spoiled meat. In medieval times, food safety was far from a priority, and rancid ingredients were a common issue. According to a 13th century report from Norwich, some cooks used diseased pork in their pies without a second thought, serving them up to unsuspecting customers. It wasn't unusual for shop owners to reheat days-old spoiled pies rather than throw them away. With poverty widespread, the choice between discarding expired food or reheating it to sell was often a disturbingly easy one, perhaps not so different from today if we're being honest. When they weren't serving spoiled food, these shops were often guilty of undercooking their meat, which earned some cooks a notorious reputation. As the saying went back then, God sends the meat, but the devil sends the cooks. It's a sentiment the shift manager at Waffle House might still agree with today. Bread was one of the most common foods during Europe's castle era, but most households didn't have their own grain mills, so they relied on bakers for their bread. While selling ready-made bread was profitable, bakers offered even more services to their customers. For instance, if someone brought their own meat to the bakery, the baker could wrap it in bread and bake it for them. This idea quickly gained popularity, perhaps too much so. In 1350, London passed a law capping the fee bakers could charge at a penny if customers brought their own meat from home. Meanwhile, you try bringing your own meat to Burger King just once, and you're banned for life. It wasn't even a whole cow. I still don't get what the big deal was. Around the same time, another modern-day fast food item made its debut: the bread bowl. Europeans began serving soups and stews in bowls made of bread, known as trenchers. This not only bulked up the meal but also likely saved money by reducing the need for dishes. But bread bowls weren't the only carb-loaded option in the Middle Ages. Soft pretzels, now a staple of state fairs and mall food courts, were also incredibly popular in medieval Europe. These twisted treats were made with just 3 simple ingredients: water, flour, and salt, making for a filling snack that even earned the approval of the Catholic Church. That's right, During fasting periods like Lent, when Catholics refrained from eating certain animal products, pretzels often served as a substitute. Monks would distribute them to children reciting their prayers, while others handed them out to the poor. Beyond the church, pretzels became a symbol of luck and prosperity. And really, who wouldn't feel lucky while enjoying a handmade pretzel? No fast food run is complete without a six-pack of booze, because if you're indulging, you might as well go all out. Drinking alcohol has always been popular, but medieval Europeans had a particular fondness for it. Perhaps it was the challenges of living in medieval Europe that made alcohol so appealing. Even during Lent, when meat was off the table, people found ways to compensate. For some, fish became the go-to substitute, while others turned to alcohol. While it offered temporary relief from abstaining, the practice of staying thoroughly soaked during Lent didn't sit well with some religious leaders. In 1400, Benedictine monk Robert Rippon strongly criticized excessive drinking during Lent, arguing that it contradicted the spirit of abstinence that the season was supposed to embody. He even claimed that people got more drunk during Lent than at any other time of the year. Of course, Rippon probably didn't have to endure some of the meat substitutes that commoners resorted to, like the mock egg, a dish invented as a meat replacement during Lent. If he had, he might have been right there with them, knocking back brews in the tavern. Making a mock egg is simple even today. Just take a few empty eggshells, fill them with a mixture of almond milk, jelly, and crushed almonds, dye it yellow, and wash it down with a mug of ale. Tasty? Sugar is something we often take for granted today, but during the medieval period, it was a rare and costly luxury, typically enjoyed only by the wealthy. Instead of sugar-filled candy bars, people flocked to cook shops for treats sweetened with honey. A 14th century cookbook, Anonimo Veneziano, features a fritter recipe made with apples, saffron, flour, and honey. An earlier, more frugal fritter recipe consisted of fried dough stuffed with ginger and almonds, topped with a delicious beet juice. Gingerbread was another popular way to satisfy a sweet tooth, made with honey and spiced with ginger, cloves, and pepper, creating a unique sweet and spicy flavor. But when it came to indulgence, nothing could beat the funnel cake, a scrumptious combination of fried dough and powdered sugar. This carnival favorite originated in medieval times as fried cakes known as crisps, which were considered a rare treat due to the sugary topping. Because sugar was so scarce, people often improvised with their recipes, leading to the creation of dishes like fritter of milk, essentially fried, sweetened cottage cheese, a dessert you'd give your kids if you wanted to punish them. Waffles, as we know them, also emerged during this time. The original waffles, known as obilios, date back to ancient Greece and were flat cakes cooked between two plates. They weren't sweet, a grave oversight that might have contributed to Greece's downfall. Later, the Catholic Church began making flour waffle wafers, often depicting biblical scenes. But it wasn't until the Crusades that a more recognizable waffle batter, combining cinnamon, honey, and cream, gained popularity in Europe. In the 15th century, the Dutch invented the famous grid patterns that transformed waffles into the ultimate syrup and whipped cream delivery systems, celebrated by junk food enthusiasts for centuries. Initially, waffles were a common street food but eventually became the breakfast and dessert staple we toast up today. Thanks to the discovery of the New World, sugar became affordable and accessible by the 16th century. London even opened a sugar refinery, kickstarting a trend that persists in modern food processing, adding sugar to almost everything. Sugar quickly replaced honey in most desserts, and people began crystallizing fruits, syrups, and even using sugar to season meats. Covering a plate of fish and vegetables with enough sugar made it taste like, well, sugar, a welcome change for families accustomed to eating less than appetizing meals. Sugary concoctions became popular junk foods during this period, including crispy crusts topped with berries, fruit, or ginger, and a sweet fruit-filled ravioli called cuscanals. Now that's a name you could imagine on a Hostess wrapper, right next to a mascot like the Cuscanals Kid. This newfound love of sweetness transformed the European diet to such an extent that the word dessert can be traced back to this era. Derived from the French word desservir, meaning to clear the table, it came to refer to the last course by the mid-16th century. The English later adapted the word to describe the final course of fruits and sweets that people enjoyed after their meal. The Cuscanals Kid would be proud. So what do you think? Would you be brave enough to try some junk food from the Dark Ages? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of our other weird history videos.